It would not be right if we continued and didn't pay any attention to those for whom this is really a life or death issue, basically, in their lives. And I'm not sure we're going to be able to hear from all of them now, but we'll do some. And as the afternoon progresses, it would be lovely to be able to hear from each one of them. Victor, just step forward a minute, would you? I think you struggled with your gender, is that right?
Yes.
So what happened? What was the issue, and what started to move you on in your life?
I think the issue was that I never had good role models in my childhood, and then also in teenage life. I always only had these toxic friendships with young males much older than me, and I would just do whatever they say, because I also had huge problems with depression, with self-esteem, with bullying, and it just distorted my view about masculinity, about how I was viewing the males in my life back then.
So what was the turning point for you?
The turning point for me was when I became a Christian, and I understood that what God has to say about masculinity and about being a man, and that what society has to be about being a man is completely different than what God has to say about that. And it's not only about your muscles or about how macho you are, but it's about your character. It's about your feelings. It's about being a man is not that you have to be insensible or. So I just stepped into what God has to say about me, not what society says about me or my past traumas and issues have to say about me.
And then you visited a TV studio, I think, and things went in a completely different direction.
Yes, there is this TV station in Romania. They saw my testimony because it went viral in my country, and they called me to testify there live in their studio. Yes, and that started my journey practically.
And Victor's working for us now for more than a year, and it's been an absolute pleasure and a joy working with him. But Kieran, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us a little bit of your story.
So I was raised in a Sikh family, and I thought I was born gay. I just thought it was my right to pursue this lifestyle because I felt this kind of feelings as I was quite young. And then probably pretty much from age 18 up until 4 years ago, I encountered the gospel message. The power of God just released me from homosexuality, completely delivered me. I don't crave that lifestyle, I don't miss it. I'm a much more happier, joyful person since I've encountered Christ and the love of God. It's completely changed my life, and I'm just in awe of what God has done for me.
Thank you so much. And Rob, how's it been going for you in life? Because I know you came down to London and started living the gay life. Is that right? What happened?
I moved to London in 2014 because I had same-sex attraction and I was a Christian, but I found it very frustrating and isolating in church, and I realised the feelings weren't going away. So I lived in London for a bit, and actually I found it was more frustrating because of the rejection, the constant search for perfection from other gay men, how they always, well, not always, but mostly cheat, they're in open relationships, they're promiscuous, there's drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and this is all made worse by the fact that none of this is ever talked about in the media. It's just presented as this rosy picture of perfect happiness. So in the end, I ended up getting anxiety and panic attacks, and I resisted God's call back to him for a while, but in the end, I came back because I had the worst panic attack in my life, and I felt like I was going to die, and I realised that same-sex relationships are not God's will, and it's rebellion against God. If you carry on them, then it will be your fault, and you will have to answer to him, and literally, you go to hell. This is what God showed me. And in his grace, I repented and turned back to Jesus Christ, and I'm following him now. And my life is much better.
Much better. So, not finished yet. Something in process. You're on a journey. I think that's what we're saying here. Well, it's really a great joy now to ask Elizabeth Woning to join us. Reverend Elizabeth Woning has a master's degree in theology, is a licensed pastor in North California and co-founder of the Changed Movement. She attended seminary, openly lesbian, before choosing to leave the LGBTQ community and identity. Her work focuses on the intersection of faith with culture pertaining to same-sex sexuality and gender identity. Reverend Woning is an outspoken voice advocating for the legal rights of Christians across the world with same-sex sexual attraction or gender dysphoria to align with their biological sex. She's been married to her husband for 16 years. And Change Movement is a network of people who have left LGBTQ behind because they wanted to. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Well, it's such a privilege to be here with you today, and I am not a scientist, and I don't have any statistics for you. And so you can take a sigh of relief, maybe, and just listen to me as I share a little bit of my story and experiences with men and women who desire to leave the LGBTQ experience behind. So, as Michael said, I'm here as a pastor and one of countless people who have left LGBTQ identity behind and experienced diminishment of their homosexual feelings so that they can now identify heterosexual or straight. Through Changed, which is an organization that I co-direct with Ken Williams, we'll get to hear from him in just a few minutes. I represent a worldwide network, and right now I can say that there are roughly 1,500 to 2,000 people with whom I'm in connection who have left LGBTQ behind. I guess I want to say that as they have pursued changes, their motivation, it varies. They've pursued changes away from same-sex sexual behavior, enough that many of them now today not only identify as heterosexual, but also are married and have children. That's Ken's story. This is a population that most people believe don't exist. I think you might have heard X Out Loud say, "We exist." Now, why is that? Mainly, it's because we have no reason to identify as a specialized people group. I told Michael the other day, I fought hard to identify simply as a woman. And so we identify as heterosexual. We don't make a big deal about it. We now belong as humans in the rest of society. So as a result, all these studies leave us out. Anyone who's benefited from prayer ministries and programs that specifically address unwanted same-sex sexual behaviors have been maybe intentionally or unintentionally excluded from the majority of the studies that are being used to substantiate the harms of so-called change-allowing therapy or conversion therapy. Obviously, one can't go to the LGBTQ community and hear about radical stories of change. And so people never hear about us in the media either. So as a pastor in a large church in Northern California, I have the privilege of speaking with and encouraging many people who have unwanted same-sex attraction, who are walking out their faith. I see my role as a pastor as one who affirms an individual's personhood and offers understanding while gently pointing to Jesus, who loves us all unconditionally. I provide a safe space for people to question their sexuality with the possibility of turning away from LGBTQ. In the midst of this type of environment, one can receive healing to overcome the effects of lifelong rejection, relational breakdowns, emotional pain, sometimes abuse or trauma, self-condemnation or self-hatred, all with the effect of bringing a fresh self-understanding or a different way forward, a vision for a different future. The existence of our grassroots movement proves that this network, or that this approach, this approach can result in fulfilling lifelong, lasting change. So I want to talk about some of these individuals. If you go to our website at changedmovement.com, you'll see mostly stories. We mostly want to tell the stories of men and women who have left LGBTQ behind. There are dozens of them. And every week on our Instagram site, we publish new stories. It's stories like Kathy Grace Duncan, who lived as a man for 11 years before, through her faith, she began questioning the decisions that came into her decision to become transgender, identified as a man. So she lived so many years as a man, but now she's detransitioned. She lives as a woman, and she leads women's ministries. Or my friend David Reese, who, when he began questioning his sexuality, that is, when he decided that he didn't really want to be gay, he wasn't a Christian. He didn't become a Christian until long after he began searching out counseling options that supported his desires to change. Or David Rasmussen, who was in a marriage and lived an illicit secret life as a gay man for years before telling his wife and going to counseling so that he could save his marriage and his family. So these friends of mine are vitally important to this conversation. Therapy bans threaten the lives of individuals like us, whether minors or adults, who are in pain. Let me just say that again. We are in pain over our LGBTQ feelings. And so as a result, we seek support to diminish the feelings. Bans cause harm because they don't ever allow you to address the pain. They disallow personal exploration with a professional to address the factors that could be formative in the development of same-sex sexual behavior. LGBTQ identifying people must have the right to follow their faith wholeheartedly and pursue their own life goals, even when it means moving away from LGBTQ to identify as gender-congruent heterosexual. For most of us at Changed, our religious convictions fundamentally guide our worldview and sense of personal identity. It's important that legislators grasp the gravity of forcing a person with unwanted same-sex attraction, no matter their age, to disavow their religious faith to embrace LGBTQ identity or same-sex feelings or behavior. In thinking about all the ways I could bring to light the pastoral needs of this community, I thought I would just start with my own story, my own testimony. I first began questioning my sexual identity at 16, when I entered a relationship with another woman that lasted several years. But in my 20s, following social norms, I got married to a man. Unfortunately, very quickly after this, I had a mental breakdown, and I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1. At the time, I reasoned that efforts to force myself into this heterosexual marriage were fundamental to my distress, and so I divorced my husband and I came out as a lesbian. I continued in psychotherapy, punctuated by several hospitalizations, until I was nearly 40. Had you asked me in my 20s, I would have said that the gay community kept me alive. But I also had a deep love of theology, and as Michael said, I went to seminary openly lesbian. In 2000, that was relatively rare. So I was one of a handful of students in my seminary that were openly out. And together we were searching for ways to bring the gay community into the church. Because we had been born gay, because we believed we had been born gay, we thought there was only one way to do that, and that was to change doctrine, to change our understanding of Scripture. And so when I graduated from seminary, I entered into parish ministry. And in that setting, I was exposed to other vibrant expressions of Christianity. And in the next years, I spent ways discovering the new presence of the Lord that I saw in my new peers. Through prayer, I developed a fresh and life-giving perspective of my faith that began to bring me peace. And this is significant. It brought me peace from the distress of bipolar disorder. I came to believe that God knew me uniquely and that he loved me deeply, that he had meaning and purpose for my life. And with that relational framework, that is the framework of relationship between me and my God, and the caring Christian community that I was surrounded with, I rediscovered the sexual ethic of the Bible. I began to recognize that lesbianism had given meaning and purpose to my life over and above my religious convictions, and that caused an internal crisis. I felt it was inconsistent with the demands of Christian faith. And like many of my former LGBTQ friends, my faith gave me a reason to question the assumptions I had made about my sexual orientation. I would never have done that had I not moved from seminary into parish ministry. Faith became a guiding factor in my sense of identity, and my behaviors began to change. I also reevaluated in that setting the degree to which formative experiences had shaped my sense of identity and well-being. In the context of safe and loving relationship with God and those around me, I confronted trauma and abuse that had never been addressed in all the years of psychotherapy that I had. I couldn't have done that without the assistance and guidance of experienced pastors and ministry leaders who affirmed my identity as a woman and my goals to overcome my now unwanted same-sex attraction. Within 6 years of my graduation, all symptoms of bipolar disorder had gone into remission. I gradually ceased taking the multiple medications that I had used to manage those symptoms. At the same time, my experiences of same-sex sexual attraction also began to diminish. I entered into a relationship with a man and we eventually married, and as Mike said, I've been married to him for 16 years. Over half of my adult life was dominated by bipolar disorder. My longest hospitalization was 30 days because of extreme suicidal distress. At one time, I was a candidate for electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. In fact, the longer I underwent psychiatric care for the disorder, the more unhealthy I became. Recall that I identified as a lesbian during all that time. In all of this, the confusion and the underlying pain of my experience of my sexual identity was never analyzed. It wasn't until my faith encouraged me to question the foundational beliefs and potential formative experiences underlying my lesbian identity that I began to experience relief from the emotional pain. I can't help but believe that dismissing the underlying issues that informed my sense of sexual identity caused me great harm. I sometimes ask myself what might have happened if a trusted adult or pastor had allowed me to process my sexual feelings about my close friend when I was 16 in a way that didn't presume I was a lesbian. I might have realized then, as I do now, the extent to which those feelings pointed to larger issues that needed resolution. Perhaps I might have avoided all those years of unsuccessful psychotherapy. I don't think I can begin to tell you the gravity of that conclusion. Shouldn't minors be allowed that chance? And in an era when gender identity has such high stakes, pointing to life-altering drugs and surgeries that frequently cause sterilization, shouldn't children be given every opportunity for self-discovery and relief from trauma that might alleviate gender dysphoria? At Changed, we believe it's important to create opportunities to unravel all that pain that accompanies unwanted same-sex sexual orientation or gender confusion. Pastoral care and counseling provides a vital, safe space to explore one's identity in the context of their faith. People like us at Changed want answers about the life-dominating experience. Saying I was born that way, it just doesn't cut it. It doesn't explain it. It's not an idea that holds up to science, as we've heard already. Great harm is coming to people like me, who in the secular world are turning to the secular world for understanding, but yet the secular world is denying all the science that you've heard this morning. And then promoting behaviors that are increasing incidences of syphilis or AIDS, STDs, and even suicidality is increasing. We want to be able to question the formative experiences of our lives. We want to be able to understand ourselves and move forward. And so we don't want to dismiss childhood experiences, ACEs, or sexual abuse. And for women, it includes appreciating the degree to which sexual assault and rape have driven us to the safety of another woman's arms rather than being able to approach opposite-sex relationship. So let me say again, LGBTQ identifying people deserve the right to follow their religious convictions wholeheartedly, to pursue their own life goals, even if it means moving away from LGBTQ. In closing, I just want to introduce Ken Williams. And so maybe we could bring Ken up. Ken Williams and I first met at Bethel Church in Reading about 5 years ago. And as we were getting to know each other, we met with a mutual friend. All three of us had never met, or at least I had never met, anyone else who had left LGBTQ behind. And we spent a year every week talking about the experience of leaving LGBTQ. What was it like? How did God do that? And at the end of that time, we felt that we could establish a ministry supporting others like us, and that was equipped to love. And so, Michael, were you going to introduce Ken? I'll let you take that over.
Ken, we almost had it in the bag where you were going to be able to come to London, but then it just didn't work out in the end. But at some point, we really need you here. Reverend Ken Williams is a licensed pastor in California, co-founder of the Change Movement, formerly suicidal over what he felt like a gay orientation. Reverend Williams is an author, a lecturer, and a minister helping others navigate LGBTQ issues with Christian care. He's also an ardent defender of the rights to conscience, particularly to determine one's own sexuality apart from government restriction. As such, Reverend Williams has testified in numerous legislative hearings and briefings internationally. He has been married to his wife since 2006. They have 4 children together. Changed Movement is a network of people who have left LGBTQ behind because they wanted to. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate it. It's a real honor to be here. I'm among esteemed guests. When governments propose legislation or rulings like the one being considered in the UK, it obviously gets people's attention if you're somebody with a story like mine, because I don't know where I would be if mandates had been in place when I was seeking help. So thank you for your time today. As Dr. Davidson said, I've been a pastor in Northern California for 15 years, and it's my privilege for these last 5 or 6 years to spend full time helping minister to people that are impacted by LGBTQ. These are the people I can most relate to in the world. I know the pain of being labeled or of being unsure of identity and clamoring for that, and not really easily finding any allies that can really understand exactly what you're going through. And so we minister to people all throughout that spectrum. And as was shared, I co-lead a couple of ministries with Elizabeth. It's my honor to do that. I'll tell just a little bit about my story, and then want to kind of share what we've experienced, that others experience in their journeys as well, and some different ways that people are ministered to that really has brought great fulfillment and freedom in their lives. So I was a church kid. I was raised in church from the time I was born. and found faith in Jesus Christ as my personal savior when I was 8 years old. Had I think a pretty typical childhood for the most part. I was teased and bullied a bit by other boys, mostly because I was the skinny, scrawny, short boy, which most boys are not looking to be the shortest and scrawniest, but I was that kid. And so, you know, it was difficult to keep up with the other boys. You know, they were bigger and stronger and faster. And I got tired of being the one who couldn't keep up. I got tired of the constant comparison. And so was in some pain over that. And then when I was also around 8 years old, I was exposed to hardcore gay pornography. I was in a field playing with a few other boys, and one of them opened up a boot box, and inside was hardcore gay pornography. And if you've never seen gay pornography before, then or if you've never lived that life yourself, you probably have no awareness of some things that go on behind that door. But what I witnessed was not merely, you know, the male version of a sexual loving relationship. What I witnessed was men degrading each other, defiling each other. I saw vile things that is much farther than merely two people interacting sexually. And that further wounded my perspective on masculinity. I could not understand why a person would treat another person that way. And then as I grew older, you know, then into my early teens, I just was having more and more reasons, it felt like, to push my masculinity away. Basically, I didn't esteem it, you know, from having not measured up to the other boys, from witnessing those vile acts, and from not feeling like the other boys really got me. I felt like I was more creative and more expressive. I wanted to talk deeply. I believe I was called to be a pastor from birth, and so, you know, I wanted to connect emotionally, and most of the boys my age were not interested in that. But I'll tell you, the point at which I first experienced same-sex attraction came directly after that exposure to the gay pornography, because what that catalyzed was for a couple of the other boys to initiate sex play. So my first sexualization was at the hands of a male, not a female. And I had deep shame and self-hatred over that, because even though no one ever told me anything, you know, about sexual interactions or anything like that, I knew it was wrong. It felt really wrong to me to be interacting that way, you know, as an 8-year-old, certainly, and with other boys. And so that shame marred me, and that experience, that sexualization, traumatized me. And I remember when I would show up at that friend's house, ever after that, I remember I'm just going to be real and a little bit graphic, because this is, you know, legislation like this dramatically impacts a person's life like mine, and the public needs to understand what this means. So, I mean, I remember then every time I would show up at that friend's house, I would be sexually aroused upon arriving, because even as an 8-year-old, I had been sexualized in a way that people should not be. This dramatically impacted my view of myself. It impacted who I thought I was, because then in the following years, what I would understand would be messaging, even in the 80s, that, oh, well, if this is how you feel, then this is who you are. And there was no talk of, well, and there still isn't today, of, well, I wonder if it's the things that happened to you and your understanding of what happened to you and why that maybe caused beliefs to get rooted, and therefore desires to emerge out of that. And I can take you all the way from my from about 8 years old all the way up until after college, and look at my my school pictures. And whoever was the strongest, most successful, kindest young man in my class is the one that I would fixate on. And I would develop a codependent fixation on them. And the only way that I would feel somewhat whole or like I knew who I was if I was getting affirmation from them. I believe that what happened for me was my disdain for masculinity due to the insults that happened to me caused me to push my masculinity away. And the fact is, I was born with XY chromosomes. I was born male. And so when you push away your maleness and yet you're born male, you're pushing part of yourself away. So I was trying to find myself in the more impressive looking, kind male, a version of masculinity that maybe I could respect if they were kind. And so I was looking for me in him, and I would do that in, just obsessively. I remember I would stalk certain guys. I mean, I would be parked outside their house at midnight as a 16, 17-year-old, just wanting to be closer to them, because that's the only way I felt okay with me, is if I was somewhat close to this person who defined me. And this was all sexualized, because remember, my first sexualization was at the hands of a male and at an early age. So by the time I ended up having some sexual interactions with a few boys in my teens, and that was deeply traumatic because it went against my faith convictions and it didn't scratch the itch. I still didn't know who I was the minute after they left my house. We would have some kind of a sexual interaction. They leave. Now I'm feeling destitute again. I'm feeling emotionally bankrupt. And so it was, it never scratched the itch. And so eventually I became suicidal over this as a 17-year-old. I was just exhausted from the trauma of wanting to find out who I was and nothing ever working, and then the guilt of acting against my faith convictions. So eventually wrote out 9 pages of my hate, anger, pain, handed it to my youth pastor. My youth pastor said, "We're going to tell your parents," which was the right move. He knew my parents. My parents cried with me for 2 hours. They were so devastated that I had been so wounded and hopeless and depressed and suicidal under their roof, and hadn't felt safe to share it with them. And so we cried together for a couple of hours. They said, what do you want? I said, I don't want this life, but that's all I'm attracted to. So I started seeing a Christian psychologist, Dr. Paul Schmidt from New Life Counseling Center in Louisville, Kentucky. And I saw him weekly for 5 years. And I'm telling you what, that was the last moment that I was suicidal. Now, let me say this, my first moment of being suicidal was after I had gone into a Christian bookstore to see if they had any resource when I was 17 that would help me address my unwanted same-sex attraction, and there were none. So my first feelings of suicidality were leaving the Christian bookstore because I couldn't find any resource to help me in honor my faith journey with my sexuality. But he did. And he spent so much time with me, just like showing me love, just showing me the unconditional love of God. He would say, "Ken, you wouldn't understand grace if it hit you across the face. You've got to understand that Jesus forgives anything that we feel guilty about." And he got me into a support group, which I paid for and was happy to do it. And I finally found people who I could relate to. Like I wasn't alone, and my secrets were safe with him. And I found this group of people who had a similar life experience. So I was never suicidal after this. I also came across David Seaman's book, Healing for Damaged Emotions. And he was just down the way from me at Asbury Theological Seminary in Kentucky. I was living in Kentucky at the time. And, from reading that book and then processing with my psychologist, he helped me realize, I began to realize I was carrying a lot of relational pain and rejection pain, trauma from the porn and the sexualization as an 8-year-old. So I had major unforgiveness issues. I basically hated any strong male. I actually felt it was wrong for any male to possess any strength because I felt it was so oppressive. And so in my narcissism, I determined that I would be better than all the other males. And This, of course, separated me from other people, because when you're narcissistic and prideful, people don't want to be around that. So it became a very lonely place. But I began to feel loved by my psychologist and by God eventually, and then by others. My psychologist encouraged me to join a Christian fraternity. And that was one of the best things that could have ever happened, because I had these typical men who accepted me just as I was. Even though I was quirky, they accepted me and they showed me love. And so that began to erase those misunderstandings in my mind about how I was this different version of masculinity than they were. And then I started just pouring myself into more of reading the Bible and pursuing God in prayer and in worship on my own. And I saw in the Bible that God didn't label people as gay or straight. He just labeled them male or female. And so what did that mean for me? Because I had been hungry to know that I measured up as a man for years, but my own self-perspective had disallowed that. But these men in my church and my fraternity, mentors that came along, helped me to see and embrace my own masculinity, and eventually to be able to bond with the other males. And that started changing my perspectives. So this was an ongoing journey. I just kept pursuing emotional healing, and it was prayer ministers, it was counselors and pastors and friends that did the ministry here. So I began to forgive others. I repented for my judgment of others and for stereotyping all strong men as evil. I no longer saw gay as an accurate representation of who I was. I basically began to be able to embrace Jesus's love for me, imperfect as I was, and to start to love myself. And I just began to believe that God wasn't condemning me, but that he was actually wanting me to find my deepest self. And that's what the journey was that I was on. And so over time, through just this, everything that, going on in my life that I've described to you, I began to see that my fixation on men started to dissipate. My objectification of them, my undressing them with my eyes started to fall away. Porn and masturbation fell away dramatically. Those were my pain medication, my emotional pain medication, and those started to fall away. And I eventually began to embrace my masculinity. And this didn't happen overnight, it happened over years, but it happened. And my sexual arousals, to my shock, dramatically changed, to the point that I began to notice in my early 30s, this girl in my young adults group, and that I had been developing a friendship with, and I became attracted to her. And I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna speed it up. But basically, I fell in love with her. I thought she was beautiful on the inside and the out, and been married to her for 15 years. We have 4 children together. I'd no longer do porn or masturbation. I have rich friendships with heterosexual men. I have pleasurable sex without the fear of HIV, a sexually transmitted infection, or damaging my body by sex acts that biologically a body is not designed for. And following Christian faith has been life-giving and fulfilling for me, greatly so. I want to mention one of my friends who had been married to his wife for 50 years, but lived a gay lifestyle. And he was at a gay bar one night, and this man came up to him and said, "I'll give you $20 to have sex with me." And my friend said no, because he wasn't attracted to him. And the man said back to him, "Well, I'll give you $20 for a hug." Do you understand that so much of homosexuality is emotional pain presenting as a need that gets sexualized? And so sex doesn't cure that. You can have as much sex as you want, but if the need is an emotional wounding or a trauma or an abandonment, that doesn't scratch the itch. I mean, I have a friend a member of our team who was in a lesbian life for 6.5 years, but went to church with her girlfriend, felt led to go down for prayer by herself during a time of worship and ministry, and felt impact by the Lord. She felt touched by the Lord, and the same-sex attraction left her in that moment. And she has been out of that life now for 9 years and is attracted to men. This was just by availing herself of being in a a Christian atmosphere where she was seeking to connect with God. So we help. That's one of the ways we minister to people, is we help them to go pursue their own relationship with God. Another friend of mine who I minister to was sexually aroused by men 20 to 30 years older than him, even as a teen or a man in his early 20s. And he then began to realize that, well, the abandonment he experienced by his own father had become sexualized. That's why he was searching. He was searching for a daddy, but it had become sexualized, and that the ways that the porn that he had viewed as a child had caused him to compare his own genitalia to these male models in the, as he's a boy, he's comparing his male genitalia to the men in the pornography that he was watching, and he felt like he didn't measure up as a male. And then the abandonment by his father and all that put together caused him to feel like he was needing a male and needing a daddy, someone to kind of complete him and all that, but it became sexualized. These are the things that we owe it to people to create a safe space to let them say what it is that they're feeling and why have they come to feel these ways. So that is literally what we do, is we create that space where people can say absolutely anything, be totally transparent, and we help connect them to a loving God who has grace for whatever they're dealing with. And then we seek God's counsel on when is the first time that you started to feel this way? Okay, what was happening, and what did you come to believe about yourself in that moment? And then we seek God for, okay, is that the truth of their life? This way that they came to feel about themselves, is that reality, or is that merely an assumption that they made based on life experiences or their environment around them? And so often people start to realize, wow, I have been defined by things that don't necessarily accurately define me. And as anybody would know, with any background in faith or in counseling or anything like that, who we believe we are has everything to do with how we will behave. And I just am an advocate for the fact that people should have the right to get counseling and make personal life changes that bring them peace and happiness. Like, it's no business of the government to mandate how individuals should identify sexually. This should be up to the individual to do with their counselor, with their pastor, to find self-understanding and healing for anything that ails them. Thank you so much for your time.